What if I told you that one of Hollywood's most famous historical epics got a lot of the history wrong? Braveheart is a film that stirred hearts and minds with its tale of William Wallace, the fearless Scottish warrior who led his people in a rebellion against England. But how much of what you saw on the screen was fact, and how much was fiction? In this video, we're going to break down the real history behind Braveheart and compare it to the movie. Was William Wallace really the hero we've been led to believe? Did the events unfold as dramatically as they were portrayed? Stick around, because some of the truths we uncover might surprise you. Before we dive into the real story of Wallace, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in discovering more untold truths behind history's biggest legends. William Wallace, the real man behind the legend. In Braveheart, William Wallace is portrayed as a simple man turned warrior, driven by revenge after the brutal murder of his wife. But in reality, Wallace's early life remains something of a mystery. While the film suggests he was a commoner, some historical records indicate that Wallace might have been born into minor nobility. His family was part of the lower gentry, meaning he likely received some formal education and military training. What we do know for sure is that Wallace emerged as a leader during a critical time in Scotland's history. After the death of King Alexander III, Scotland found itself in a succession crisis, which gave the English king, Edward I, an opportunity to exert control over the country. Wallace became one of the key figures in the Scottish resistance, but his rise was more politically complicated than the movie suggests. It wasn't just about avenging a loved one, it was about defending Scottish independence. Did Wallace really lead a ragtag group of rebels against an oppressive English monarchy, or was he just one of many leaders trying to navigate a complex political landscape? Let us know in the comments, what kind of leader do you think Wallace truly was? The Battle of Stirling Bridge, fiction versus reality. One of Braveheart's most iconic scenes is the Battle of Stirling Bridge, where Wallace leads the Scots to a spectacular victory against the English. The film portrays the battle as a chaotic, head-to-head clash in the open fields, with Wallace delivering a rousing speech about freedom before leading his men into battle. In reality, the Battle of Stirling Bridge was much more strategic, and there was actually a bridge. The real battle took place on a narrow bridge over the River Forth in 1297, where Wallace and his forces took advantage of the terrain. They allowed only a portion of the English army to cross the bridge before attacking, trapping them on the wrong side. This clever tactic helped Wallace and his ally, Andrew Murray, secure one of Scotland's most significant victories. The movie, however, completely omits the bridge and simplifies the battle into a classic underdog story. While Wallace's leadership was crucial, it was his strategic thinking and the geography of the battlefield that gave the Scots the upper hand, not just raw courage. Do you think the filmmakers left out the bridge to make the battle more cinematic, or was it just to simplify the story for audiences? Robert the Bruce, hero or traitor? Another key figure in Braveheart is Robert the Bruce, portrayed as a conflicted nobleman torn between supporting Wallace and serving his own ambitions. In the film, he is even shown betraying Wallace at a critical moment, which leaves a lasting impression that Robert the Bruce was a treacherous opportunist. But the real story is far more complicated. Robert the Bruce did initially side with the English, as did many other Scottish nobles, because the political situation in Scotland was extremely unstable. However, Robert eventually became one of Scotland's greatest kings and played a crucial role in securing Scotland's independence after Wallace's death. In fact, Robert the Bruce's victory at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, several years after Wallace's execution, was the defining moment in Scotland's fight for freedom from English rule. The film's portrayal of Robert as a hesitant leader is misleading, and his supposed betrayal of Wallace is historically inaccurate. The reality is that the Scots were divided, and many nobles switched allegiances several times during the Wars of Independence. Robert the Bruce was no different, but to call him a traitor overlooks his eventual triumph in leading Scotland to independence. Freedom and execution. Wallace's true legacy. Perhaps the most memorable part of Braveheart is Wallace's passionate cry of freedom as he's tortured and executed by the English. While it's true that Wallace was captured and executed for treason in 1305, The real circumstances of his death are even more brutal than the film suggests. Wallace was hanged, drawn, and quartered, a horrific punishment reserved for traitors, but there's no historical evidence that he shouted for freedom in his final moments. That said, Wallace's legacy is undeniably tied to the idea of freedom. He became a martyr for the Scottish cause, and his death galvanized the continued fight for independence. Wallace's execution turned him into a symbol of resistance against oppression, and while the movie takes creative liberties with his story, the core message of his defiance and dedication to Scotland remains. But here's the question. Does it matter that the movie changed so much of the historical record? Can a film still be meaningful if it sacrifices accuracy for storytelling? Let us know in the comments what's more important, historical truth or emotional impact. The Fictional Romance with Isabella of France. One of the more controversial aspects of Braveheart is the romantic subplot between William Wallace and Isabella of France, the wife of Edward II, who was the Prince of Wales at the time. In the film, Isabella has an affair with Wallace and even implies that her child is actually his. This romantic angle is pure fiction. Isabella was, in reality, only a child at the time of Wallace's rebellion. She did not marry Edward II until 1308, 3 years after Wallace's death. The filmmakers likely added this subplot to give Wallace's story a romantic edge, but it's a glaring historical inaccuracy that's often criticized by historians. The real Isabella of France would go on to play an important role in English history, eventually leading a rebellion against her husband, Edward II, but her involvement in Wallace's story is entirely fictional. Braveheart's legacy: fact, fiction, and nationalism. Despite all its historical inaccuracies, Braveheart has left a lasting impact on popular culture and on how people view Scottish history. The film reignited interest in Scotland's fight for independence and brought William Wallace's story to a global audience. It even influenced modern Scottish nationalism, with many people drawing parallels between the movie's themes and contemporary political movements. But there's a danger in letting historical fiction shape our understanding of the past. When movies like Braveheart blend fact and fiction so freely, they can distort our perception of real events and figures, creating myths that are hard to disentangle from reality. Still, there's no denying the emotional power of the film and the way it resonates with audiences. So, what's your take? Should we be more critical of films like Braveheart for their historical inaccuracies? Or should we appreciate them for the stories they tell and the emotions they evoke? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Conclusion. While Braveheart may not be an accurate portrayal of Scottish history, it certainly left its mark on how we remember William Wallace and the fight for Scottish independence. The film takes significant liberties with the facts, but it captures the spirit of defiance that Wallace embodied, a man who stood up to a powerful empire in the name of freedom. As we've seen, the real history is often more complex than the simplified version Hollywood gives us. But that doesn't mean the story is any less compelling. If you enjoyed this exploration of Braveheart's historical twists, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more fascinating deep dives into history's greatest myths and legends coming up.